The sun was setting when Liam, Emma, Ryan, Sophia, and Daniel arrived at the edge of the dense forest. Their plan had been simple enough: a weekend of hiking, camping, and exploring some forgotten landmarks they'd come across on an old map. Liam had always been the adventurous one, dragging the others into all sorts of excursions, but this time there was something about the forest that felt different. As they looked into the thick canopy ahead, the air seemed to grow heavier, more oppressive. "This is it," Liam said, holding up the map. "The old sanctuary should be somewhere deeper in." Emma, always more cautious, bit her lip as she surveyed the surrounding trees. "Are we sure this is a good idea? No one's been here in years." Ryan scoffed. "Come on, Em. It's just a bunch of stones. What's the worst that could happen?" Sophia shrugged, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes as well. Daniel, however, was silent, his gaze fixed on the distant shadows between the trees. He hadn't said much during the drive up, and now he seemed even more withdrawn. With their backpacks secured, the group set off into the forest. The path seemed oddly straightforward at first, almost as if the forest wanted them to find their way. They passed by thick underbrush and towering trees, the quiet of the wilderness enveloping them. As the minutes ticked by, the forest grew eerily silent, as though even the birds and insects dared not make a sound. Liam led the group with determination, map in hand. The deeper they ventured, the more he felt a strange pull toward the sanctuary. It wasn't long before they found it, an ancient formation of moss-covered stones standing in a perfect circle. Symbols, worn and barely visible, were etched into each stone, their meaning long forgotten by time. "This must be it," Liam said, stepping forward to inspect one of the stones. "The sanctuary of the full moon. Looks like no one's been here for centuries." Emma frowned, looking at the faded symbols. "This place gives me the creeps. We should leave." But Ryan, as curious as ever, approached one of the stones and knocked on it. "It's just rock," he said with a laugh. "What are you afraid of?" As the others explored the site, Liam's attention was drawn to one particular stone. Its surface was smoother, the carvings more intricate. Without thinking, he reached out and touched the cold surface. A shiver ran through his body, and for a brief moment, he thought he felt the stone hum beneath his fingers. "Did you feel that?" Liam asked, looking around. The others glanced at him, puzzled. "Feel what?" Ryan asked. Liam shook his head. "Nothing. Must have been my imagination." The group lingered at the sanctuary, setting up their tents nearby as the sun dipped lower in the sky. The air grew colder, and a strange fog began to roll in, obscuring the path they had come from. As the night descended, the silence of the forest became suffocating. It was as if the trees themselves were holding their breath, waiting. Sitting around the campfire, they exchanged stories, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over them. But no matter how hard they tried, the strange energy of the sanctuary lingered. Liam couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The shadows between the trees seemed darker, deeper. As they drifted off to sleep, the forest remained still, but something was stirring. The stones of the sanctuary seemed to pulse under the light of the rising moon, as if they were waking from a long slumber. The first sign that something was wrong came in the dead of night. Liam stirred in his sleeping bag, a distant sound pulling him from his restless sleep. He sat up, glancing around the dimly lit campsite. The fire had long since burned down to glowing embers, casting faint shadows across the group's tents. He strained his ears, but the forest was silent once again. Maybe it was nothing. But just as he lay back down, he heard it again, a low, distant hum, almost like a whisper carried on the wind. Liam's heart quickened. He glanced at the others, tense, but they seemed undisturbed. Everyone was still asleep. Curiosity gnawed at him. Against his better judgment, he unzipped his tent and stepped out into the cold night air. The forest was thick with fog, and the full moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie silver glow over the stones of the sanctuary. The humming seemed to be coming from there, calling him. Liam approached the stone circle, his feet crunching softly against the damp leaves. As he neared the stones, the air grew colder, the hum growing louder. He stopped in front of the stone he had touched earlier, Now, under the light of the full moon, the symbols on its surface glowed faintly, pulsating in rhythm with the hum. He reached out, his fingers trembling as they brushed against the cold surface once more. A shock ran through him, stronger this time, like a surge of energy coursing up his arm. His vision blurred for a moment, and he staggered back, trying to catch his breath. What the hell? Behind him, a twig snapped. Liam whirled around, his heart racing. At first, he saw nothing through the dense fog, but then, slowly, a figure emerged from the mist. It was Ryan, his face pale and drawn, eyes wide with something that looked like fear. "What are you doing out here?" Ryan asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Liam let out a shaky breath. "I could ask you the same thing." "Did you hear that sound?" Ryan frowned, shaking his head. "What sound? I woke up and saw you walking toward the stones. Thought you might be sleepwalking or something." Liam stared at the glowing symbols on the stone. "There's something weird going on here. I felt it earlier when I touched this stone, and now..." Before he could finish, the fog thickened around them, and the hum grew louder, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. The other stones in the circle began to glow faintly, their symbols pulsing in sync with the one Liam had touched. Ryan's eyes widened. What the hell is happening? Liam didn't have an answer. His pulse pounded in his ears as the hum grew louder, more insistent, like a voice he couldn't understand but was desperate to. The air felt electric, crackling with a strange energy that seemed to fill the space between the stones. "Liam!" Ryan shouted, grabbing his arm. "We need to wake the others now." They turned and ran back toward the campsite, their footsteps echoing in the unnaturally silent forest. When they reached the tents, they found Emma and Sophia already awake, standing outside their tents with anxious expressions. "What's going on?" Emma asked, her voice tight with fear. "We need to leave," Ryan said, breathless. "Something's wrong with those stones." Liam nodded. "The symbols. They're glowing. I think we triggered something." Daniel emerged from his tent, his face drawn and pale. "What do you mean, triggered something?" Before Liam could explain, a low growl rumbled through the air, sending a chill down all their spines. They froze, their eyes scanning the fog-shrouded trees. The growl came again, closer this time, deeper, as if something was moving through the mist toward them. "We need to go," Sophia whispered, her voice trembling. "Now." As they hurried to pack up their tents, the growling grew louder, accompanied by the sound of footsteps crunching through the underbrush. Liam's heart raced as he fumbled with his backpack, his fingers clumsy in his panic. His mind screamed at him to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But something about the hum from the stones held him in place. Just as they finished packing, the fog parted, and from the shadows, a figure emerged. It wasn't human. Its eyes glowed yellow in the darkness, and its hulking form moved with unnatural speed and grace. The growl that escaped its throat was deep and guttural, sending shockwaves of fear through the group. Liam's blood ran cold as the creature stepped into the moonlight, revealing its true form. A monstrous, wolf-like creature, its fur matted with dirt, its teeth gleaming in the faint light. It stood on two legs, towering over them, its gaze fixed on the stones behind them. What is that?" Emma breathed, her voice barely audible. Liam couldn't answer. His legs felt rooted to the ground as the creature took a step toward them, its growl vibrating through the air. It wasn't just a predator, it was something far older, something tied to the stones, to the forest itself. Without warning, the creature let out a deafening roar, and in that instant, Liam knew they had disturbed something ancient, something that should have remained buried in the sanctuary of the full moon. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze as the creature's roar echoed through the foggy night. Every instinct screamed for Liam to run, but his legs refused to move. He was paralyzed by fear, his mind racing with the impossible reality before him. "Run!" Ryan's voice shattered the silence, jerking Liam back to his senses. Without thinking, they all turned and sprinted into the forest, their feet pounding the earth, breath coming in ragged gasps. The dense fog swallowed them whole, and the trees loomed like dark sentinels, closing in from every direction. Behind them, the creature's growls grew louder, closer. It was chasing them, and it was fast. Liam's lungs burned, and his muscles screamed in protest as he pushed himself to keep up with the others. Branches whipped at his face, and the ground beneath him was uneven, full of hidden roots that threatened to trip him at every step. But he didn't dare slow down, not with that thing behind them. They ran in a frantic, desperate line, weaving through the thick trees, but no matter how fast they ran, the growling never seemed to fade. It stalked them, always just behind, always just out of sight. And with each passing moment, the fog thickened, as if the forest itself was trying to trap them. Suddenly, Emma stumbled. Her foot caught on a root, and she fell hard to the ground with a cry of pain. Liam skidded to a stop, rushing back to help her up. "Come on," he gasped, pulling her to her feet. Her ankle buckled under her weight, and she winced in pain. I think I twisted it." "Lean on me," Liam urged, draping her arm over his shoulder. "We have to keep moving." Ryan and Sophia had stopped a few feet ahead, panic written all over their faces. "Hurry!" Ryan shouted. "It's coming!" With Emma limping beside him, Liam tried to move as fast as he could, but he knew they were slowing down. The creature's growls grew louder, closer, until they could feel its presence right on their heels. Suddenly, the growling stopped. Liam froze, his heart hammering in his chest. The forest had gone eerily silent, save for the ragged breaths of his friends. He glanced around, but the fog was too thick to see anything more than a few feet ahead. "Where did it go?" Sophia whispered, her voice barely audible. Ryan shook his head, his eyes scanning the trees. "Maybe we lost it." But Liam knew better. The forest was too quiet, too still. The creature was out there, watching, waiting, and then, from the shadows, came a low, chilling sound. Laughter. It wasn't the creature. It was human, deep and mocking, and it sent a wave of cold terror down Liam's spine. He turned toward the sound, squinting through the fog, trying to make out who or what was laughing. A figure emerged from the mist. At first it looked like an old man, his features hidden by the shadows, but as he stepped closer, Liam's heart sank. It was the same man they had seen earlier, the one who had appeared so suddenly at the campsite. His clothes were ragged, his face gaunt and pale, and his eyes gleamed with an unnatural light. "You shouldn't have come here," the man said, his voice like gravel. "This place is not for you." Ryan took a step forward, fists clenched. What the hell is going on? What is that thing chasing us? The man's lips curled into a sinister smile. "That? Oh, that's just the beginning." Liam's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" The man took another step closer, his gaze locking onto Liam's. "This forest is ancient, boy, older than anything you can imagine. And those stones you touched, they woke something up. Something that's been sleeping for a long time." Sophia let out a shaky breath. What is it? What did we wake?" The man's smile widened. "A guardian, a protector of this land. It's been waiting for someone to disturb the stones, waiting for its next meal." Liam's heart raced. "We didn't mean to—" The man raised a hand, cutting him off. "It doesn't matter. You're here now, and it won't stop until it's taken what it wants." Emma, still leaning heavily on Liam, glanced fearfully at the man. "What does it want?" The man's smile faded, and for a brief moment, something like pity flashed in his eyes. "You." Before they could react, the man dissolved into the mist, his laughter echoing around them like a haunting melody. Panic surged through the group. "We need to go," Ryan said, his voice trembling with fear. "We need to find a way out of here, now." Liam nodded, his mind racing, but even as he tried to form a plan, something inside him knew the truth. They were trapped. The forest wasn't going to let them go. "Come on," he urged, helping Emma along as they began moving again. "We just need to keep moving. There has to be a way out." But as they pressed deeper into the woods, the fog thickened, swallowing the trees and the path ahead. It was as if the forest was closing in on them, guiding them towards something or someone. The growl returned, louder and more menacing than before, and this time, it wasn't alone. Liam's heart sank as more growls echoed through the trees, coming from all directions. There were more of them, more creatures lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. "We can't outrun them," Sophia whispered, her voice tight with fear. "What do we do?" Liam glanced around, his mind racing. They couldn't stay out in the open. They needed shelter, somewhere to hide, at least for a little while. "There," he pointed toward a small clearing ahead. "There's an old cabin." The others followed his gaze, and sure enough, through the thick fog, the outline of a dilapidated cabin came into view. It was barely standing, its walls crumbling and the roof sagging, but it was better than nothing. "Go!" Liam urged, helping Emma along as they made their way toward the cabin. The growls grew louder, and the sound of footsteps crashing through the underbrush echoed all around them. The creatures were closing in. With their hearts pounding, they reached the cabin and threw open the door, scrambling inside just as the first shadowy figure emerged from the fog. Liam slammed the door shut and bolted it, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The cabin was dark and cold, the air thick with the smell of rot and decay. But for now, it was their only refuge. "We can't stay here forever," Ryan said, pacing the small space. "We need to find a way out." "I know," Liam replied, his voice strained, "but we need to figure out what we're up against first." And as they huddled together in the darkness, listening to the growls of the creatures outside, one thing became terrifyingly clear. The forest wasn't just haunted by ancient beasts, it was alive. The old cabin creaked ominously as the wind howled outside, and the low growls of the creatures circling the perimeter grew louder with each passing second. Inside, the air was thick with tension, their breaths coming in shallow, panicked gasps. Liam stood near the boarded-up window, trying to peer through the cracks. His mind was racing, searching for any sign of hope, but the fog outside had thickened so much that he could barely see a few feet beyond the cabin's walls. The creatures were out there, waiting, stalking them. "They're toying with us," Ryan muttered, pacing nervously across the small room. His fists were clenched, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal. "They know we're stuck." "We have to do something," Sophia whispered, her voice trembling. She clung to Emma, who was still nursing her injured ankle. "We can't just sit here and wait for them to attack." Liam shook his head. "We need to figure out what these things are. The man said they were protectors, but protectors of what? This place? The stones?" Ryan stopped pacing and turned to face Liam. "Who cares? All I know is that we need to get out of here, before those things tear us apart." "He's right," Emma said, her voice weak but determined. "We can't stay here forever." Liam knew they were right, but something about the man's warning gnawed at him. There was something deeper going on in this forest, something ancient and dangerous, and running blindly into the woods without understanding what they were up against would only get them killed. Suddenly, a faint whisper echoed through the cabin, so soft at first that Liam thought he had imagined it. He turned to the others, but their wide-eyed expressions told him they had heard it too. The whisper came again, a low, haunting sound that seemed to come from all around them. It wasn't the growl of the creatures, it was something else. Something human. "Do you hear that?" Sophia asked, her eyes darting nervously around the cabin. Liam nodded, straining to hear the whispers. They were faint, but growing louder, as if they were coming closer. The sound was eerie, like voices carried on the wind, speaking words he couldn't quite make out. Emma's grip tightened on Sophia's arm. "What is that?" Liam's pulse quickened as he stepped away from the window. The whispers were now unmistakable, filling the cabin with an unsettling presence. It was as if the walls themselves were alive, murmuring secrets they weren't meant to hear. "Look," Ryan's voice broke the tension, drawing their attention to the far corner of the room. There, carved into the wooden floor, was something none of them had noticed before. Strange symbols, etched deep into the wood, glowing faintly in the dim light. Liam crouched down, studying the symbols. They were unlike anything he had ever seen. jagged, intricate markings that seemed to pulse with a strange energy. His fingers hovered over them, hesitant to touch them. Sophia knelt beside him, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What are these?" "I don't know," Liam admitted. "But they feel wrong." Ryan let out a frustrated growl. "Great, now we're stuck in a haunted cabin with ancient symbols. Can this night get any worse?" As if in response, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The walls creaked and groaned, and the temperature in the room dropped sharply, making the hair on the back of Liam's neck stand on end. "Something's coming," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. Suddenly, the door rattled violently, as if something on the other side was trying to break in. Everyone froze, their eyes locked on the door as it shook and groaned under the pressure. "Get away from the door," Liam hissed, backing up toward the far side of the room. The door shook again, harder this time, and the growls outside intensified. Whatever was out there wanted in, and it wasn't going to stop until it got them. Without warning, the window shattered, sending glass flying across the room. A monstrous, clawed hand reached through the opening, swiping at the air, trying to grab hold of anything within reach. "Run!" Ryan shouted, but there was nowhere to run. The creatures were at every entrance, surrounding them, closing in. Panic surged through Liam as he grabbed a piece of broken wood from the floor and rushed toward the creature's hand, swinging with all his might. The wood connected with a sickening thud, and the creature let out a piercing screech before retreating into the fog. For a brief moment, there was silence. Then, the whispers returned, this time louder and clearer. The voice was no longer a distant echo, but a clear, menacing presence within the room. "You woke them," the voice hissed. "You cannot leave." Liam's heart raced as he looked around the cabin, searching for the source of the voice, but there was no one there. The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Who are you?" Liam demanded, his voice trembling with fear and frustration. The whispering voice chuckled darkly. "We are the forest. We are the guardians. And you are the trespassers." Ryan's face went pale. "Jai, what do you want from us?" The voice didn't answer immediately. Instead, the symbols on the floor began to glow brighter, casting an eerie light across the room. The temperature dropped even further, and the air became thick with a suffocating presence. "You cannot leave," the voice repeated, "not until the debt is paid." Liam's mind raced. "Debt? What debt?" The voice hissed, and suddenly, the walls of the cabin seemed to shift, the very structure of the building warping and bending as if the forest itself was closing in on them. The cabin wasn't just a refuge, it was a trap, part of the forest's twisted game. "You disturbed the stones," the voice continued, its tone growing more menacing. "And now you must pay the price." Sophia clutched Emma tightly, her voice trembling. What do we do?" Liam's mind was a blur of fear and confusion. The stones, the strange carvings, the creatures. It all felt connected, but he couldn't piece it together fast enough. Ryan slammed his fist against the wall. "This is insane! We didn't do anything! We didn't ask for this!" The voice chuckled again, a low, sinister sound that sent chills down their spines. "You are not the first, and you will not be the last." The whispers grew louder, more voices joining in, overlapping in a cacophony of chilling murmurs. And then, from the depths of the fog outside, came a sound that froze them all in place. The deep, resonating howl of the creatures. They were coming for them. Liam swallowed hard, his hands trembling as he clutched the piece of wood in his hand. We need to figure out how to stop this. But deep down, he knew the truth. They were running out of time. The howling echoed around the cabin, reverberating through the thick fog that clung to the forest like a veil. Inside, tension crackled through the air as they braced for the next attack. The creatures were closing in, and there was no clear way out. Liam stood by the shattered window, his knuckles white as he gripped the makeshift weapon. His mind raced, searching for some kind of solution, some way to escape the inevitable. He couldn't shake the feeling that the symbols carved into the floor were the key. They pulsed with an unnatural energy, glowing faintly in the dim light. Sophia, her voice barely above a whisper, spoke. "We're missing something." The voice, It mentioned a debt. What did it mean? Liam shook his head, frustration mounting. I don't know, but it has something to do with those stones. We shouldn't have touched them. Ryan clenched his fists, pacing near the door. Well, it's too late for that now, isn't it? We need a way out of here, and fast. Emma, still wincing from her injured ankle, spoke up from the corner. Waiter, what if the carvings on the floor are some kind of protection? Maybe they're keeping the creatures out. Liam's eyes widened as the idea took hold. It made sense. The creatures hadn't broken through yet, even though the cabin seemed far from secure. But why? He knelt next to the glowing symbols, his breath shallow as he traced his fingers along the jagged lines. They seemed to hum beneath his touch, as though alive with ancient power. I think you're right, he said, his voice low and urgent. These carvings are tied to the forest, to whatever ancient thing is keeping us here. But how do we use them? The whispers returned, louder this time, as though the forest itself was answering his question. The voice seemed to come from everywhere, filling the cabin with its eerie, guttural tones. You cannot run, the voice hissed. The circle is complete. Sophia backed away, her eyes wide with fear. What does that mean? What circle? Liam's heart pounded in his chest. I think the stones outside and these symbols, they form a circle around us. A trap. We disturbed it, and now we're caught in its hold. Ryan slammed his hand against the wall. So what? We're just stuck here, waiting to die. No, Liam said firmly, standing up. There has to be a way to break the circle, to free ourselves. We need to understand what these symbols mean. The growling outside intensified, the creatures circling closer to the cabin. They could hear the scraping of claws against the wood, the huffing breaths of the beasts. Time was running out. Sophia looked pale, fear etched in every line of her face. We don't have time to study ancient symbols, Liam. We need to act. Liam's mind raced as he tried to piece together what they had seen. The stones, the carvings, the strange voice. The forest was alive, ancient and vengeful, but the symbols, they were more than just markings. They held power. Suddenly, Emma spoke up, her voice trembling but clear. Liam, remember what the man said? He said something about the forest being protected, these creatures. They're the guardians. Maybe we need to offer something in return. Liam stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. An offering, to pay the debt. Ryan scoffed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. What? Are we supposed to sacrifice one of us? Emma shook her head. No, not a person, but something the forest wants. We disturbed the stones, took something from this place. Maybe we need to give it back. Sophia's eyes lit up with realization. The stones. We took a piece of one of the stones with us. Liam felt a jolt of hope surge through him. It was a long shot, but it was better than waiting for the creatures to break in. Kaya, where is it? Ryan fumbled through his backpack, pulling out the small shard of stone they had picked up earlier. It looked insignificant, just a small piece of rock. But in this cursed place, it might be the key to their survival. Liam reached for the stone, his fingers closing around it tightly. We take this back to the circle. We return it, and maybe it breaks the hold this place has on us. Outside, the howling grew louder, more frenzied. The creatures were getting desperate, hungry. They wouldn't wait much longer. We'll have to make a run for it, Liam said, his voice tight with fear, but resolute. We get to the stones, place this shard back where it belongs, and we break the circle. Sophia and Emma exchanged a glance, fear in their eyes, but both nodded. Ryan, despite his earlier bravado, looked pale, but he stepped up beside Liam, ready to face whatever came next. The whispers returned, softer now, as if the forest was watching, waiting for their next move. You cannot leave, the voice hissed, not until the price is paid. Liam clenched the stone in his hand, his heart racing. We're about to find out. With one final glance at the others, he nodded toward the door. On my signal, we run, straight to the stones, no looking back. Ryan gripped a piece of wood, ready to defend himself. Sophia stood close to Emma, helping her to her feet. The tension in the cabin was suffocating, every second stretching into an eternity. Liam took a deep breath and kicked open the door. The cold night air hit them like a wall as they burst out of the cabin, the fog swirling thick around them. The creatures were waiting, their glowing eyes cutting through the darkness, but there was no time to hesitate. "Go!" Liam shouted, leading the charge toward the circle of stones. The creatures snarled and lunged toward them, but Liam didn't stop. He could hear the others behind him, their footsteps pounding against the forest floor. The circle of stones loomed ahead, the strange symbols carved into them glowing faintly in the moonlight. With every step, the howls of the creatures grew closer, the sound of their claws scraping against the ground sending shivers down Liam's spine. But he couldn't stop now, not when they were so close. Finally, they reached the circle. Liam skidded to a stop in front of the largest stone, the one they had disturbed earlier. He held the shard of stone in his hand, his chest heaving with adrenaline. "This has to work," he muttered under his breath. Without hesitation, he placed the shard back onto the stone. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the air around them seemed to shift, the fog swirling faster, as if the forest itself was reacting to their actions. The whispers returned, louder now, almost deafening, but this time, they weren't filled with malice. They sounded almost relieved. The creatures stopped in their tracks, their glowing eyes watching from the edge of the clearing. And then, as if called by some unseen force, they began to retreat into the darkness, disappearing one by one into the trees. Liam collapsed to his knees, his body trembling with exhaustion. It was over, or so he thought. Liam sat on the cold, damp ground, catching his breath as the creatures disappeared into the forest. The air around them felt lighter, the oppressive weight of the fog beginning to lift. But something still lingered, a presence that gnawed at the edges of his awareness. Ryan collapsed next to him, running a hand through his hair, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Did that really just happen?" he asked, his voice shaking. Sophia knelt beside Emma, helping her sit down gently. "I think it worked," she said, though her voice carried a note of uncertainty. "But why do I still feel like we're not out of danger?" Liam felt it too, the sense that this wasn't over yet. The circle might have held the creatures at bay, but the forest still watched them, waiting for something more. He stared at the stones, feeling the strange energy pulse beneath the earth. "There's something else," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Sophia looked at him sharply. "What do you mean? We returned the stone. The creatures are gone." But Liam shook his head. "No, I don't think this place works like that. It's not just the creatures, it's the forest. The circle was part of something bigger, the whispers. They've been talking about a price." Ryan stood up, pacing nervously. "And what? You think we still owe something? We just risked our lives getting that stone back." Liam didn't respond right away, his mind racing as he tried to piece together the events of the past hours. The voice in the forest had been speaking in riddles, warning them, testing them, but it hadn't revealed everything. He stood, brushing dirt off his hands, his gaze fixed on the forest beyond the circle. "We disturbed something old when we found those stones. The forest isn't just angry. We disrupted a balance. We gave back the shard, but maybe that wasn't enough." Sophia frowned, her face pale in the dim light. "So, what do we do now?" Liam didn't have an answer. The silence that followed hung heavy in the air, thick with unspoken fear. The four of them stood there, surrounded by ancient stones, unsure of their next move. The forest, however, seemed to know exactly what came next. A deep rumbling sound echoed through the trees, a low, guttural vibration that made the ground tremble beneath their feet. The air grew thick with tension, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Then the whispers returned. This time they were louder, clearer, and they weren't just in Liam's mind. They filled the air around them, a chorus of disembodied voices speaking in unison, their words carrying a cold finality. "The debt remains. The price must be paid." Emma gasped, her eyes wide with terror. What does it mean? What price? Liam's stomach twisted as realization hit him. The creatures weren't after the stone, they were after them. The forest demanded something more than just the return of a rock. It wanted blood. Ryan swore under his breath, backing away from the stones. No way am I sticking around for whatever that means. Sophia stood frozen, her mind racing. But we've been trying to escape this whole time. Why didn't the forest just take us before? Liam's gaze remained locked on the stones. It was waiting, testing us. We triggered the curse when we moved the stones, but the forest was waiting to see if we'd give it what it wanted. The moment we disturbed the balance, we became part of the debt. Ryan shook his head, his panic rising. No, I'm not waiting around to find out what happens next. We need to get out of here. There's no way I'm sticking around to be part of this. He turned toward the trees, ready to bolt, but Liam stepped in front of him, blocking his path. You can't run, Liam said quietly. The forest won't let you. Ryan's face contorted in frustration and fear. I'm not just going to sit here and let that thing get us. But as he spoke, the rumbling sound grew louder, and the ground beneath them began to tremble violently. The stones around them glowed brighter, the symbols etched into them pulsing with energy. Sophia gasped, pointing toward the largest stone. Look! The stone began to crack, thin fissures spidering across its surface. Light poured from the cracks, casting eerie shadows across the clearing. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as though the forest itself was demanding something. We disturbed the balance, Liam whispered, his heart pounding in his chest. And now it wants something in return. The cracks in the stone spread, until with a deafening crack, it split open. From within the stone, a figure emerged, a shadowy, humanoid shape that seemed to be made of pure darkness. It moved slowly, deliberately, as though testing the air around it. Emma screamed, clutching at Sophia as the shadowy figure stepped forward, its form shifting and twisting as though it were part of the fog itself. Liam's blood ran cold as the figure's glowing eyes locked onto him. You, the whispers hissed, you are the key. Liam took a step back, his mind racing. What do you mean? The figure didn't answer, but the whispers continued, surrounding him. You disturbed the circle, you broke the balance, and now you must restore it. Ryan's voice trembled with fear. What the hell is that thing? Liam's breath came in ragged gasps as he stared at the creature. I think it's a guardian, or something even older. It's here to take the price. Sophia's eyes filled with terror. What does that mean? What do we do? Liam swallowed hard, his mind racing. The forest wasn't just after revenge. It was demanding something deeper, something that could only be satisfied by a sacrifice. He turned to the others, his heart heavy with dread. I think one of us has to stay. The others stared at him in horror. No, Emma whispered, shaking her head. There has to be another way. But Liam's gaze remained fixed on the shadowy figure. The whispers keep talking about a price, a debt. We disturbed the balance, and now the forest wants something in return. If we don't give it what it wants, none of us will make it out of here. Ryan's voice rose in panic. You're saying one of us has to die? Liam clenched his fists, his mind racing. I don't know, but I don't think we have a choice. Sophia stepped forward, her voice trembling. There has to be another way. We can't just sacrifice someone. The shadowy figure stepped closer, its glowing eyes fixed on Liam. The debt must be paid, the whispers hissed. Liam stared at the figure, his mind spinning. He had been the one to find the stones. He had disturbed the balance. Maybe this was his price to pay. He took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. I'll do it, Sophia gasped, reaching for him. No, Liam, you can't. But before she could stop him, Liam stepped forward, facing the shadowy figure head-on. The whispers grew louder, surrounding him as the figure reached out toward him, its hand made of pure darkness. Liam closed his eyes, bracing himself for what was to come. The last thing he heard before everything went black was the sound of the whispers, soft and cold. The circle is complete. When Liam opened his eyes, everything was different. He was no longer in the forest, no longer surrounded by the ancient stones or his terrified friends. Instead, he found himself in a vast, empty space, stretching out in all directions like an endless void. The air here was still unnervingly quiet, as though even sound had been swallowed by the nothingness. At first, he thought he might be dead. Maybe the shadowy figure had taken his life, claimed the sacrifice that the forest demanded. But as he looked down at himself, he realized he was still whole, still alive. But where was he? A soft, distant whisper reached his ears, faint but unmistakable. The same voice that had haunted him since they'd entered the forest. The voice that had spoken of debts and prices, of a balance they had disturbed. Liam began walking, though there was no clear path in the void. Each step felt both heavy and weightless, as though the ground beneath him wasn't quite real. The further he walked, the louder the whispers became until they surrounded him, filling the air with their strange, haunting cadence. "You have come," the voice said, no longer distant, but directly in his mind. Liam stopped, his heart pounding. "Where am I?" The whispers coalesced into a single voice, deep, ancient, and filled with a kind of resigned inevitability. "You stand between worlds, between the living and the dead, between the mortal and the eternal." Liam's mouth went dry. "Why am I here? What do you want from me?" The voice seemed to sigh, as though weary of the question. "You have disturbed the circle, the balance of the forest. A debt was created, and now it must be settled." Liam's hands clenched into fists. "I didn't mean to. None of us did. We were just trying to—" "Intentions are irrelevant," the voice interrupted, cold and final. "What matters is the balance. You crossed a threshold, touched what was forbidden. Now you must restore what was broken." Liam's mind raced. "I already agreed to pay the price. I offered myself—" There was a moment of silence before the voice spoke again, quieter now, as though considering his words. "You misunderstand. The price is not simply your life. It is not blood that the forest seeks." Liam's heart sank. "Then, what is it? What does the forest want?" The voice shifted, and for the first time there was a hint of something more, a kind of sadness, a weight of sorrow that lingered in its tone. "The forest is old, ancient beyond your understanding. It is not a single entity, but a collection of all who have passed through it, all who have been claimed by it. Their spirits live within the trees, the stones, the very air. They are the forest." Liam stood frozen, trying to comprehend the enormity of what the voice was saying. "So, the spirits of the people who disappeared, they're still here?" "Yes," the voice confirmed. "They are bound to this place, caught in an endless cycle of existence, trapped between worlds. And now, you are part of that cycle." Liam felt a chill run down his spine. "No, I can't stay here. I need to get back to my friends." "You were never meant to leave," the voice said softly, almost with a hint of pity. "This is your fate, your sacrifice." "But that's not fair," Liam shouted, his desperation growing. "We didn't know what we were doing." "We didn't know about the stones or the forest or any of this." The voice fell silent, and for a moment Liam thought it might not respond. But then, with a cold inevitability, it spoke again. "The forest does not care for fairness. It cares only for balance. And you, Liam, are now bound to it." Liam's mind raced, searching for a way out, some way to reverse what had been done. "There has to be another way. If I'm part of the cycle, there has to be something I can do to fix it." The voice paused, and for the first time Liam sensed hesitation. "There is a way, but it comes at great cost." Liam stepped forward, his voice steady. "What is it?" "You must choose," the voice said, the weight of its words hanging heavily in the air. "You can remain here, bound to the forest, and become part of its eternal cycle. or you can break the cycle, but in doing so, you will take the place of the guardian. You will become the keeper of the balance, bound to protect the forest for all eternity. Liam's heart pounded in his chest. If I do that, will my friends be safe? Will they be able to leave? Yes, the voice confirmed. The forest will release them, but you will never leave. The enormity of the decision settled over him like a crushing weight. He had come to this forest with his friends, never expecting any of this. But now it seemed that their fate rested on his shoulders. If he chose to stay, they would be free, but he would be trapped forever. His thoughts turned to Sophia, Ryan, and Emma. Their faces, their fear. They hadn't asked for this, hadn't deserved it. He couldn't let them be trapped here, too. Taking a deep breath, Liam straightened his shoulders. I'll do it. I'll become the guardian. There was a long silence, as if the forest itself was considering his choice. Then, slowly, the darkness around him began to shift, to solidify. The void dissolved, replaced by the familiar shapes of the forest, the trees, the stones, the fog that clung to the air. Liam found himself standing once again in the clearing, the ancient stones glowing faintly in the dim light. His friends were there, their faces pale with fear and confusion. "Liam!" Sophia cried, running toward him. But as she reached him, she stopped short, her eyes widening in horror. "Liam, what's happening to you?" Liam looked down at his hands, and his breath caught in his throat. His skin had taken on an ethereal glow, his form no longer fully solid. The transformation had already begun. I made a deal," he said softly, his voice heavy with the weight of his choice. "I'm staying here. I'm becoming the guardian." Sophia shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "No, you can't do that. We'll find another way. There has to be another way." But Liam knew there wasn't. The choice had been made, and there was no going back. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "This is the only way." As the last vestiges of his human form faded, Liam felt a strange peace settle over him. The whispers in the forest had grown quiet, replaced by a deep, resonant hum, a hum that now filled his very being. The circle was complete. Sophia, Ryan, and Emma stood in the clearing, watching helplessly as Liam became one with the forest, his presence fading into the shadows of the trees. And then, as quickly as it had begun, it was over. The fog lifted, the stones grew dark, and the forest at long last was silent. If you liked it, comment below, like and subscribe.